FOGDAO is a group of builders and investors bringing you the best content on how new technologies can be used to make better games. Enjoy the show. GM friends, and welcome to the Future of Gaming. You're listening to our weekly FOGcast. We are recording this where I am, 7 a.m., the 25th of October. We've got Phil Collins, Devin Becker, myself, Nico Vereecke, and a very special guest, Ryan Foo, coming in hot from Singapore. How are you doing, Ryan?
Pretty good, thank you. Yes, very awake, very well.
There you go. So Ryan and I live in Europe, he lives in Singapore. We wake up around the same time. As totally uninteresting context. What are we talking about today? We are talking about first Apple's policy changes. So this is very hot. So this just came in. Apple's doing some weird stuff with their App Store. And we're also talking about on-chain gaming engines, something that's also been pretty hot. And then if we have time, we'll talk about Microsoft's mobile App Store, but likely we won't make it there. Good. All right. So, we know Devin, Phil, we know myself. Ryan, could you give us 2 minutes of background on yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently a games investor at Delphi Digital, right? We're a research and also an investment firm, right? So I cover particularly venture side and co-invest a lot with Nico, right? Over at Bitcraft. So yeah, future of gaming into the future of gaming.
That's it.
As they say. Yeah. And hopefully with Philip one day. And of course, working with Devin on a few things as well. So
that's the dream, man.
There.
Yeah. So we should do a Delphi Phil, like a Delphi Convoy Bitcraft thing, and then Devin can consult the company. Boom.
Yeah. Boom.
Future of gaming. Right there.
Future of gaming.
Good. By the way, sometimes you say you're like an economist and now you're a games investor. What's happening, man? What's the focus?
Well,
what do you love?
I can be both.
He's not sustainable.
Yeah. I'm sustainable. Yeah. Yeah.
And
I'm sustaining 3 different roles at once. Yeah. Exactly. Sustainable.
Yeah. That might be why you just woke up. Sustaining 3 roles at one. Good. Let's dive in. Apple policy changes. Devin, what's happening, man? Tell us the bad news.
There's a lot of stuff they added. Found out about it kind of through the Twitter sphere. So take everything with a double check it yourself kind of grain of salt. But I do think this is probably real. Because there was the whole discussion going on before where they were talking about you got to give us the cut sort of thing that was behind the scenes, but that wasn't public policy change. Supposedly this is published today, public policy changes, or I guess public to developers, right? Because I don't think the policies are accessible to the regular person unless you're signed up for the developer program. So it's pay $100 or whatever to read our agreement, I guess, at that point. But basically, they're changing stuff around, both related directly to NFTs and not related to NFTs specifically. But a lot of stuff's really around, at the end of the day, and around financial stuff. They know they're starting to get their little moat sort of eroded in lots of different ways that people are looking for ways around it, trying to find ways to buy and sell stuff outside of using Apple's, what used to be kind of a railway and has turned into more of a very masochistic tunnel at this point. And so they're trying to basically make it so that people are violating policies by going around that. Because they know NFT stuff especially is going to be something, and cryptocurrency stuff, as something that doesn't make sense necessarily to pay through Apple Pay. So until Apple catches up with that, they don't want anyone using anything else. So they've enforced some stuff that basically says you can't gate content with NFTs as one big thing. So you can't make people have to have NFTs unless, I believe, you're selling it through the app. So if you sell the NFT through the app, give Apple their 30% cut, and then gate off of that, as if it was a normal thing you were gating off of via in-app purchases, aka basically not treating it like an NFT, then they're okay with that, right? Because that's still what they were already okay with. But if you start doing stuff to kind of get around and give access to stuff, basically from things that are outside of it, they already have that issue where they're kind of there's sort of these gray areas where subscriptions outside of the App Store can sort of be allowed depending on who they decide is okay that week, whether that be Netflix or whoever. And then, obviously Amazon, has had their issues with having to pull Kindle stuff off and all that. So they're now making it so you can't use other ways to activate stuff outside of it, not just with NFTs. You can't scan QR codes to activate stuff. You can't do all these other sort of end arounds I think they've caught people using. So I think they're just really trying to lay down, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. Just give us our 30% and then we'll leave you alone. Maybe. kind of policy basically at this point. So it is really going to basically erode any kind of real NFT, like Web3 stuff for the most part, outside of situations where you purchase stuff in the game using in-app purchases and you could turn that into NFTs. I think those kinds of situations will still be allowed. But let's say you do that, sell that NFT to someone else, then they try and bring it into the game and use it, probably not going to be usable. So it's kind of basically they're just kneecapping Web3 altogether, whether they intend to or not, which I'm going to lean towards yes. Because you can't buy anything in cryptocurrency either, basically through this stuff now. So they've basically said, good luck at this point doing anything. Yeah.
Tim Cook, what the hell, man? What are you doing?
Yeah, we need the other Tim
to
weigh in on this.
Sweetie, come on.
Yeah.
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 Ryan, thoughts?
Very sad thing. So there was a take that, if they're allowing NFTs, they're going to be allowing wallets, right? But I think they found a centralized way to kind of censor that, right? So that, you're within the app, from what I understand, from within the app, right? There's no additional functionality that you can grant to a user depending on the NFTs they've transferred into their wallet outside of the app, right? So that kind of like kills the entire interoperability case because they can still censor you at the app level, right? Even if you can purchase and onboard into an NFT and go out. So I think that's a crying shame, as they say in some contexts. Yeah. Nonetheless, I think it still at least a movement in the right direction because you can still like purchase these NFTs and then go out, right? And you can see it almost as a alternate on-ramp onto Web3 rails or onto crypto, right? Which is kind of I think back in Deconstructor Fund Istanbul, I met one person who's working in the Google Play team, and he was talking about how there were some apps where you could purchase tokens, and as long, again, as Devin said, Apple gets their 30%, right? Then they're pretty happy with that. So I think that's kind of like at least what we're going to look at. But it does kill a lot of like use cases like that we're excited about, like, of course, like, open economies where players are trading, business models that rely on like a lot of player-to-player trade, and also like the interoperability case that, Nico loves and is super excited about, which I'm sure you can weigh in on as well.
Amongst others.
So that's kind of my thoughts. Yeah.
I think that's super fair. I heard, and I don't know the details here, but we know that Sky Mavis is actively working with Google to find a solution for their Mavis hub. And so it seems to me that Google and the whole Android world is more open to all of this than Apple is. Is there a world where, if you want to have or unlock the full Web3 potential, you're going to want to buy an Android phone instead of an iPhone?
I think we're already there.
I don't know how much longer it'll even rely on hardware necessarily, especially with everything we're seeing with the legal cases happening here in the US right now with app stores. In the next few years, we may see an opening up of new app stores even coming to the market. And so maybe these policies will naturally have to open up as more competitors enter, and it's not just a duopoly between Android and iOS. But yeah, I think this whole situation really just shows that all Apple cares about is that $1 equals $1 for them, regardless of it's crypto related or not. They just want their 30% share. And after that, whatever you do in the app is fine. And so the utility is not necessarily being taken away. It's just coming at the cost of, they're still grabbing their 30%. But yeah, on the App Store side, really just interested to see if this is impacted significantly by legislation, when they can't be kind of kings of the castle for forever.
It seems to me, because you're saying like they're not capping utility because they just want their dollar, their 30%, right? But it seems like because they want to be able to enforce their 30%, they're actually capping like some things that you can do. That's what it seems to me. And so very ironically, Web3 we're all about no regulation, just everything decentralized. And now the four of us are like, we need regulation. And because Apple's so powerful, and it's like, your best bets on mobile gaming or like gaming in general 10 years ago would have been buy Apple shares, because and they don't would never be considered a gaming company, but they just hold so much power because they have the best device and they can gate everything there.
Yeah, I think across Web3, honestly, regulation is going to be inevitable, right? These are transactions that I think will be ultimately regulated just like any other transaction, especially as critical mass comes and adoption grows, it won't be ignorable forever, and that's eventually it reaches the scale that regulators find it worthwhile to spend the time learning about it, and hopefully have an educated enough position that the regulations are strong. But yeah, until then, I think we're just kind of in a wait and see mode. But I have to imagine if Web3 continues to succeed, the more and more regulators will be willing to learn, and the more and more regulations will come and match non-crypto related payment functions.
Here's the problem. As the policy is written, if they enforce it as it's written right now, basically NFTs are completely meaningless and cryptocurrency has no influence. So literally all of the Web3 elements, if you consider those the two foundational aspects, are no longer functional, because NFTs have no value if you can't take them out of the app and back in to someone else, right? Like in terms of ownership and stuff like that, because you're not allowed to unlock any functionality through an external means, is the way they worded it, like whether that be QR codes or whatever, but they're also applying that to NFTs. So that means you can't even not just not gate content, but not even unlock content or unlock, let's say I'm selling characters in a MOBA, right? And you might be like, well, that's fine, right? Because I'm not gating off gameplay. I'm just allowing you to play as that character if you own that NFT. But that's even not allowed, right? So if there's no secondary market value to my thing because it can't ever come back in, and the only way it could technically have value is if I have a web version of my game also, right? Where you're allowed to bring NFTs into that web version, and then that's okay. Even then, I feel like Apple would still find some reason to deny your app coincidentally without giving a specific reason, and then just because I feel like any way you try and work around this, they'll probably just use it as an excuse to kick you off, even if you aren't technically violating the actual specific wording. But like I said, it's already specifically saying NFTs are just completely dead in the water. You could give us 30% of your NFT, but your NFT is meaningless now. So I guess Gabe was right when he said 30% of nothing, because that's what this is at that point. Like if it has no even secondary value, like if there's no way to even trade it or have any meaning of ownership, then it's not an NFT. It's just something you purchase in the app, and that's something that already exists. Cryptocurrency is also not being allowed in so many ways. Basically means you can't do anything at all in the app except maybe view your NFTs. I even wonder if they'll allow you to view your NFTs, because isn't that technically unlocking functionality, right? Like
they do allow you to view NFTs.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's depending on how
According to
strictly
the
they enforce this, like they could just basically kill everything Web3. And then I think that's kind of, I wonder how well they'll enforce that, right? Because then they get 30% of nothing. If people can't come over with their NFT stuff and give Apple their 30%, and they all have to just go over to Google or the web, then Apple's just going to lose out on that business altogether. Because if people can't find a workaround and give Apple their money and pay their tithe or whatever, then Apple's not even going to get that. So Apple actually might have like kneecapped themselves too hard at this point.
It's pretty chicken and egg, right? Because Web3 is going to rely on mobile OS or the mobile interface. And there's a great post or piece by like one of my friends, Rawson, from Digital Reflections the Digital. He wrote about exactly this, right? Crypto's App Store problem. So the final sentence, final paragraph is, ironically, crypto's roads to 5 billion users may depend on regulatory antitrust to break up the world's largest duopoly, right? So it's just like, okay, relying on Epic, to push it through. But anyway, the point being that crypto and NFTs and crypto gaming does rely on, I think we'll have to rely on like mobile to access the next like 100 million, next 100 million, next billion users, right? And it has kind of done so with like a side load, which is what Axie did, right, for Android, and hit multiple million users. So that's something that I think was pretty impressive, and I think it'll still continue to sort of grow in its own way. But I think like without that sort of rocket fuel of like traditional like UA in like mobile gaming, then it's going to be a lot more difficult to get that kind of adoption. I won't count it down and out for the count though, like for sure. I wouldn't say it's like that over, because if you look at Reddit NFTs, more people have Reddit NFTs apparently than like people on OpenSea. It's like, wow, it's kind of cool, right? So I think like being able to like purchase through Apple, it's like, okay, you give them 30%, but they have the NFTs, they can unlock, as you said, functionality elsewhere. That's kind of cool, right? Even though it's not the same as like a full-blooded like NFT, I suppose, as we hope in mobile apps. So that's kind of I think it's optimistic still. Yeah, it's better than nothing, which is a bit sad to say, but it's better than nothing. Yeah.
I hope it just bleeds people
and
out
to
the
that
web
point
then.
too. Yeah. And I mean, to that point too, I feel like NFTs in games on a mobile app store aren't a imminent enough threat for Apple's top line to care about yet. Um, but eventually, their policy will be dictated by their own self-interest. And so if there's enough of an opportunity for them to potentially open this up in the future, I have no doubt that they'll jump at it. But right now, maybe they view it as just a little bit more preventative because they see potential damages coming from it, and they'd rather get out ahead of this and stop those potential damages than just kind of let it sit and see what happens, just given the fact that it's not an immediate negative impact on them today.
Well, they can also selectively enforce it, right? So if they have their buddies, people that they're friends with, they'll like be like, oh, we'll let King do it or something, like someone that they happen to like already rely on a lot for money. They might be okay with it because they'll be like, oh, we know you're going to make something. You're going to do it this way because that's what way we'll be okay with, and we'll work some kind of deal out, and we won't enforce this on you, and that way we'll make sure to get our 30% cut, and everyone wins. It might turn into one of those kind of things where there's a lot of closed door deals happening, and so you start to see some stuff trickle in. But I know there was a ton of games, like for a fact, looking to come into mobile and being okay with giving Apple 30% and just doing the functionality. Now all of a sudden they've like I said, they've slammed the door on a lot of potential revenue if they enforce this as it's written. Like it just seems kind of dumb at this point, because if you were just like, hey, we'll give 30%, cool. I think their biggest reason for doing this is the secondary market revenue. Like they want to close the GameStop loophole, right? Where they're like, you have to make all of your purchases through us. You can't purchase these NFTs somewhere else and bring them in, aka secondary market. And I think because they don't get a 30% cut of that, that's what it comes down to. And maybe that's all they'll really enforce against, is like people trying to buy stuff on secondary. And like if there's no secondary market and all of the marketplace happens within the app and people could take the NFT out but can't ever bring it back in, then they'll always be okay with that. Like I said, that kind of severely limits what you consider an NFT at that point. But as to Ryan's point, if it like unlocks functionality somewhere else, and when you take it out, you're taking it out to go do other stuff, or like it's treated as an NFT, like still in the game, but you can use it for other things outside of it, and you're never like selling it to other people, then maybe there's some functionality. But at that point, that starts to go to the people's arguments of like, why do you need blockchain then? Right? Like, because it just could be a database. It could be an API. It could be a million different things. It doesn't need to be blockchain with Apple's policies. And therefore, like, if you're developing a mobile game under these policies, then you might as well not bother with Web3. Like, there's just not much point in doing that. Like, I mean, maybe there's some edge cases, but like they basically just nuked the middle of the whole core of Web3 with this, in terms of like if they enforce it to the letter. It's all get
I like
sad
the point
now.
you're making on backdoors. Yeah, everyone's gonna be sad. I like the point you're making about backdoors because it reminds me of why I heard about the early days of the App Store, right? Like in the early days of the App Store, it's very much about like that kind of like backroom deals, right? Example being like inventing IAPs by. So I heard a story of one, sort of famous mobile game developer who invented IAPs by. So back then there were only like premium games, right? You could sell. And then there's like, free games, right? So the free games and the premium games, and you could sell for like $149, $299, and $14.99, whatever price points, right? One app developer decided to create a set of like, premium games in order to simulate IAPs. So it was like you could play the free game for free until like level 5, and then like level 5 you had to purchase the next game for $2.99. Next game had like level 5 to 10, and it was like this like crazy workaround to get IAPs. And then Apple was like, "Come on, you can't do that, right?" It was like, "You can't do that," and he was like, "I'm doing it," and yeah, then they worked it out, right? So I think the point you're making about like how that creates like additional like top line revenue for Apple, right? I think like if what we predict about like how like these games are gonna really significantly boost like blockchain features are significantly gonna boost LTV for these users, for example, and we find a way to cut in Apple in some way, right? Might not have to be on every secondary market transaction ever, right? Shout out Roblox, but yeah, I think Yeah, I
They're
think
not games, they're
nonetheless,
experiences,
it could
Ryan.
be
Come on.
experiences. Yeah, I know. I'm so sorry. Yeah, yeah, low blow. Anyway, yeah, yeah. Like then I think there might be a way to sort of move ahead. Unfortunately, I am not the person to liaise with Apple yet, so we'll see. Yeah,
Soon.
yeah, we'll see on the people who do have experience. So that does make like sort of experienced people who can sort of liaise with the App Store and Apple and Google, like that. I guess increases the bullish case for them, I suppose. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's what I'm curious too on the utility side. When I mentioned, I don't know if this will actually impact utility. Those backdoors are going to be very interesting, especially to see how far they are enforced, and if there's some way where you can have your wallet 2 or 3 connections removed away, and that item in the game, it's not an NFT in the game, but there is functionality or features that are being unlocked by having that item. And then, somewhere out in the nether, there's a wallet that has an asset that's tied to it. Obviously, that's a lot of complexity and might be reserved for the diehards, but I'd be curious to see if Apple even bothers to try to enforce that at that scale. But who knows? This is definitely a TBD type of conversation.
I also wonder if this is
Yeah, I
targeted
mean,
because you can't activate stuff purchased out elsewhere, it says. I wonder if this is actually targeting the web store stuff where like Clash of Clans and other games are selling stuff on their web stores. I wonder if this is actually specifically disallowing that as well. Because if it is, that was a big workaround people were moving into that suddenly like shut down. Like obviously they're not going to like kick Clash of Clans off the store, right? Over it, they'll be like, no, guys, because it's a big seller for them. I mean, they did kick Fortnite off, but that's because like Fortnite picked a big fight with them, and that was kind of different. They weren't just trying to be sneaky; they were blatantly trying to be in your face, kind of like no Apple. So
I like that. Yeah,
Also,
thank you.
the number
I
of
think
teams back last year that would tell me that they were going to submit an application for the App Store, not mention NFTs, and then as soon as they get accepted, just slide them in the back. It was surprisingly high for people raising millions of dollars. So you never know what you're going to see.
We're all criminals at this point.
yeah.
In Web3
well, I'm
world.
curious how this is going to affect
In
like service
Apple's eyes.
providers like Stardust that are like looking to help support mobile developers by using APIs and stuff to be able to integrate Web3 easily. Because I think this still pretty much applies to their stuff. Which like I gotta imagine if they're reading this, they're in like scramble mode. For a lot of because it's not just Stardust. There's a lot of other providers, but they're the ones top of mind. But that are like absolutely doing this kind of stuff. That's got to be like they're going to be looking at those workarounds, like Phil was saying. Like, how can we distance this stuff even further via our APIs and databases and stuff, so that it's like not an NFT but is an NFT? And maybe that's how we end up getting around it for now, and then just see who gets slapped down.
It was nice of Apple to announce this a few days after Stardust announced their raise.
Right.
They must have waited to be nice to the team.
They should have waited
At
till
this
after
point-
midterms.
Yeah.
At this point,
After the Super Bowl.
when Stardust, when it loses its technological edge, it's going to be like, oh, if you want to ever find a way to make money through the App Store, you're going to have to partner with someone like Stardust because they know, how to backdoor and get some money.
Maybe
get
they've
some,
already made a deal
crypto
with
integration.
Apple.
Yeah, exactly. Who knows?
I've heard of VCs that offer that as a specific edge. Like I previously used to work with. I know the guidelines. I know a guy who knows a guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like people use those interconnections in Apple all the time. Like I would love for it to be like a merit-based fully, like to the word thing of approvals. But at the end of the day, both the approval system and the marketing system there are pretty integrated. I mean, like anyone who saw the Marvel Snap push, suddenly there was like App Store notifications about a new app. Like I'm pretty sure that was unprecedented, that there was like a push notification about a new game release. A lot of people were mentioning it. I mean, I'm not a regular Apple user, so I don't know if that's like truly unprecedented, but that's a pretty big deal. And I got to imagine someone at second dinner took Apple out to a third dinner to be able to afford that, because that was not an easy deal, I imagine, to strike. And it's a game I love, so I'm all for it. But it's interesting to see those kinds of new things, especially now that Apple is really turning into the ad business all of a sudden. So.
Should we? I'm interested to learn more about Marvel Snap. So what's special about it?
I'm a card game guy, and I managed to get in on the start of the beta, and it's just I don't know. It's a very short game, 6 turns, very fast, very fun. I wish it was crypto friendly, to be honest. Like I wish I could NFT the cards because it took me all 4 like months just to get every one of the cards. But it's just a fast, easy game. I recommend to people that like those kind of games. It's fun. It seems like there might not be a lot of depth at first, but I think there is. Anyone who's played like Smash Up kind of knows like the value of locations that you fight over. It's the same concept, and that adds a lot of variety. So I don't want to like go on and shill the game for everyone, but I think it's a cool game and it's free to play. So why not?
No, I have to correct you on the definition of shill there. So shill, my understanding is like paid shill, right? So there's like a
right. I don't have any
vested
bags
interest
on this.
you have.
True.
You have no bags. You have no
NFTs,
way to dump on it on people. Yeah, no
if
NFTs.
only I had
right?
NFTs. Yeah. Or where's my bag? Someone
then
hand me
you
some
would.
bags.
With our
There you
millions
go.
of listeners that all want NFTs, and then the price goes up, and then boom, you can dump on them.
That's right. I'm gonna flip
that's,
these
that's
cards.
chilling. Yeah.
Yeah.
So therefore,
Well,
there's
let
no
me-
shill.
let me-
It's just
let me
a
talk about
recommendation.
Splinterlands instead. I have bags to shill Splinterlands. Let's get on that one.
Good. All right, let's move on to a happier topic, a topic that makes me more happy. So, as some of you may know, I am interested in the weird stuff you can do with blockchain technology and games. That is more than Web 2.5, which is what I would say 90% of the industry is doing, which is, we have a game. Our items are NFTs, and that's pretty much all of the innovation. And I'm talking about putting more of the game logic on-chain. And the ultimate extreme of that is having on-chain games where there is no server, there is no backend. The game is a smart contract or a set of smart contracts, and there's a thin client, which is usually browser-based, that interacts with this on-chain gaming world. We've seen some games being built. Like, for example, one example of this is Wolf Game. Wolf Game is, it's hardly called a game, right? It's more like, okay, it's a game, right? Ryan confirms.
But they're adding
has
land.
sheep and wolves.
Game theory.
Exactly.
It's a game theory game.
Yeah, that's fair. And because in the end, isn't everything a game? Isn't capitalism a game? Anyway, that's another
absolutely.
discussion. So, on-chain games. There's like many people are like, why would you ever put a game on chain? Because everything you can do on chain, you could do better off chain. But there's some interesting use cases. We've talked about it a lot. And now in Bogota at DevCon, the team of Lattice and Optimism have displayed their on-chain gaming engine called MUD, M-U-D, unrelated to the original MUD. It's probably related, but it's not that. It's a similar type of game. And so they've displayed what you can do with it. It's essentially like a easy and fast way to build interactive experiences that live on chain. And so what they've displayed is literally Minecraft, but every block is being tracked on a blockchain. In this case, it's not the Ethereum blockchain, obviously, but you can walk around, you can mine a block, and then every block you mine is a transaction, every block you place is a transaction. And it's just like, I saw that and my mind was blown, because if you told me that smoothness and speed would exist a year from now, I'd be happy, but it's here today. So yeah, I was blown away by that. I found it really cool. Ryan, you've seen it. You've played around with it, right? How is it?
Yeah, I've seen it. I've not played around with it yet, right?
Okay.
But I understand that. Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah. So
Bullish?
I think it's very impressive. Yeah. We can talk a bit more about like sort of the benefits perhaps that on-chain gaming might unlock, right? Like this question of autonomous worlds, right? I think very relevant in the context of our previous discussion on platforms, right? And like their power, the ability to like throw people off. I think it's kind of like the in particular like a very Web3 kind of thing, to be able to have something that exists independently of its creators, right? So I think that's why they chose the sort of pop menu of autonomous worlds, right? So autonomous being like can run by itself, and worlds as in not just games, but sort of experiences, like just like Roblox, yeah, but autonomous, right? So like no one can kind of shut them down, and people can kind of extend them at will, right? And I think like that's kind of like the potential unlock. Of course, right now, and of course the TAM remains like, if you're going like full VC on it, like you talk about TAM and all that, and it remains like small, right? And also like the amount of developers that can meaningfully execute on these things, like I think like you can count probably less than 1,000, right? And it's a very conservative estimate, right? So I think it just takes time for all this to be adopted. But the real bull case from an investment perspective is, the Cambrian explosion that comes with like composable games, right? So I think the interesting piece about MUD is that the way that they structure like the modules, right? It's like every contract or every component that you're building is like every contract they're building is like a component, right? That can then be reused by like other potential apps, right? Or dApps that are using also using MUD, right? And that allows, like, for example, and very sort of contrived example here, right? But a contrived example might illustrate this. Like if, Nico did all the hard work of implementing like Fog of War, right? When he was making StarCraft on chain, right? And I'm like, hey, I don't want to do all that hard work. I don't know so much about zero knowledge proofs, but Nico did this, Fog of War thing. I can just take that and then build Red Alert, right? And I change some of the stats and, change the sprites, the front end, and then I have Red Alert, right? And, of course, like Red Alert and StarCraft are already built, but just using this to sort of explain like about new potential games that can come out. And like, yeah. And I think it's important to know in contrast to like traditional game dev, right? Where it's like people don't really share what they're doing, right?
No, you get engines at best, right? That they share within a company like Frostbite or something like that.
That's right. At best, you share it within a company, but now you can potentially. So there's a lot of like question mark, a lot of potential risks here, right? But you can potentially like have incentives for people to build these components that, when revenue flows into those systems or those worlds, a percentage of that value flows back to the original component creator, right? So I think that's kind of like the very interesting part in value capture. That MUD is and Lattice and other companies like them, present another path where Web3 can be kind of interesting and useful. So yeah, that's sort of my take. Yeah. Also, like from conversations with the team. Yeah.
I think that's a great take. My VC take, especially on the TAM, is that right now, as you said, these games are, first of all, like the gameplay itself, again, because it's on chain, it's never going to be as good as any game that you would build on a traditional server, right? And so what I see a lot of people do, and I see this the whole time with Web3, like all of what the Web3 technology stack is, they're thinking, okay, what games do I know would benefit from this technology, right? Which is completely skeuomorphic thinking. It is like, we have this new technology. What can we do with this? These mistakes have been made throughout human innovation, right? First web pages were like, what if you put a newspaper on, like, with a scroller, essentially? That was what a web page was like. And now we have TikTok, right? And so my bullish VC take here is that what DeFi did for the financial space, which is essentially decentralizing the programming of value. I think right now we've recreated like a large part of the existing financial infrastructure. And I think the products that will come out of DeFi, because we've now opened it up and we've allowed literally anyone to program like DeFi protocols and essentially like financial infrastructure, I think we'll see products that don't exist today, because now we can do everything, have everything interact with each other. It's just going to take a bit of time. And I think similarly, when it comes to on-chain games, I think of building on-chain games because we're using the game word. Everyone thinks of, okay, what games can we build with this? And I think the way this will evolve is more like on-chain virtual interactivity, where it's not so much like that is like a multiplayer game that you go in and you're like, oh, I'm going to play a game. But I could see this evolve into like a very simple top-down world where you can go to a bank and then interact with your literally own bank account, because your own bank account will be on chain. And so you can, and the innovation that can be built from there can be like enormous, right? And so the way I think of this is less of what games can we build with this, but what can these technologies like do for the way we interact online, essentially? Because in the end, often games have been used to pioneer new technologies because they're like a playful way, and they set the stage and it's low risk, right? And yeah, traditionally games have been used to experiment with new technologies that have then go on to find their real mainstream use case. 3D is one example, and there's a lot of other stuff as well. And I think this might be the same thing.
Sounds like it bleeds more into metaverse ideas than necessarily like games. Because the part is interesting is what blockchains were built for versus how some people are trying to use them, right? So like one of the big features of blockchain is the consensus mechanisms, right? The shared validation. And one thing you don't need to do when you're playing a game is have every single action you make validated by hundreds of people randomly across the internet, right? Like you have a server emulated that's trusted server, and so like we have different blockchain layers that that maybe could be organized differently, that have like less validators or different ways of doing it. And I think it starts to kind of dig towards this idea of like what makes sense for a blockchain to be part of, because there's elements of it that totally make sense, right? Like where the reason why you don't want a centralized server is that can go down, right? Like you want decentralized servers so that it's like this decentralized platform that doesn't go down. And so there's that aspect, but that's also part of the validation aspect. And so maybe we need to like tease some pieces apart for different blockchains. Maybe we start to see like certain games layer blockchains that are built with like parts of blockchain technology and not others. Like you start to get towards that trilemma sort of ideas and different ways of skewing. And this is where like, it's a use case for it. We don't need a one size fits all blockchain necessarily. And we have this idea of like, oh, let's secure stuff down at the bottom layer of say Ethereum, but we can build stuff on top that needs to do less things or different things. And it sounded like you were talking about this one was using optimism from the sound of it. So like, different layer 2 blockchain. And so I think this is just opportunities and use cases for different ideas. And I think games will help blockchains explore different ways of doing stuff that isn't financial necessarily. But the way you're talking about it also does sound like a little bit like if we're treating the blockchain as a decentralized but shared database of trust, and then we're building on top of that database and saying that database now represents a world. And we start to get to the idea of, what is reality in the matrix? And it's just a consensus. The idea that this is a computerized consensus mechanism. And like, it's establishing a reality by, virtual consensus. And like, so the idea of like metaverse stuff or virtual stuff, I think still suits this very well, because that makes sense to like validate and trust and like have consensus mechanisms more so than just like a game where we're running around shooting each other or something, right? Where like server validation still matters, but you don't need decentralized server validation. But maybe that's where we build layers, right? Where there's parts of the game that are on chain and parts of it that aren't. So you have parts that don't need to be validated, separated off, and all this experimentation that was great. Like you get the people that are just going crazy and doing stuff like, Monaco or whatever, just doing nuts games on chain so they could pioneer and see what works and what doesn't. And then the people later on who are going to build the mainstream stuff can take what worked from that and build different stuff. That's what I'm interested to see with stuff like Oasis ends up being, right? Because you've got like all the Japanese and South Korean game developers like all over that, like established game developers. So I'm curious to see what that chain ends up doing, for example, because it's obviously geared towards those people. So those kinds of specialized chains, obviously not all of them survive, right? But at the end of the day, like some of them will be like, oh, it's a good thing we had this random one someone did that happened to actually catch on. So it's cool, but we're very much in like the pioneer days of this stuff, like no doubt. Like it's really good that we're experimenting and like exploring, but some people are just going to get eaten by wild animals, and that's just the nature of the beast at this point.
Yeah.
100%. And I think
I'm so proud
the
of
interesting
Devin.
part here, sorry, Ryan, the interesting part here, which we didn't touch on yet, is that so the way you describe it is, we now have like a database that it is focused on games, right? And I think the innovation here is that until now, most on-chain games were built on top of the EVM, which is the Ethereum virtual machine. And the main innovation here is that they've said like, the EVM, it's very good. Like it's, as we all say, it's a world computer. It's like running, Call of Duty on your CPU in your computer. And what we're looking at now, and this is something that Optimism is doing, and we've seen another, like a number of other teams do as well, is build a blockchain, like a decentralized technology. If we want to call it blockchain, maybe it's not a blockchain as per se, because it maybe not blocks in a chain, because you don't necessarily need to save the state every time and keep track of everything. Anyway, they're building basically like a decentralized GPU to run games. So instead of having to put your game on the EVM, which is not made to run games, you now have a game specific blockchain infrastructure. It's like a decentralized server. And I think this is an innovation that will have a lot of value moving forwards, because this like, and this is what will result in what I described before, where it's not so much like a World of Warcraft or a Call of Duty that you have on chain, but it is this, interactive virtual world where you maybe have your character and you can start walking around. And maybe that's how the metaverse turns out to be. I don't know.
Well, I think what we need is a blend of cloud gaming and blockchain gaming. So we're using blockchain gaming as the decentralized transactional database to store data persistently, and then the cloud gaming for the rendering, the gameplay, that sort of stuff that Stadia or xCloud or any of those are doing, running that stuff, so that, because that doesn't need to be decentralized, right? The client end of things and all that kind of stuff. So the idea is you merge those two, right? Because the nice thing about cloud gaming is there's already no cheating. You can't cheat in cloud gaming because you have no control over the server, right? So you take that and like people are making clients and trusted sort of things because those can be trusted to make those database transactions, right? Because the player's not in control of the client. Therefore, you can trust transactional requests from those servers to be valid to the database servers, or essentially the blockchain. So then you merge those two, you have the gameplay on the cloud, all the data stored on the blockchain, everything validated and trusted and signed by things, and still potentially composable because other cloud games can use that because they're all coming from kind of trusted sources to sign those things. I think that's the perfect way of merging those two, so we get the best of both worlds. We get like the really, real-time gameplay merged with the persistent world of blockchain in a decentralized fashion. And like cloud games themselves are sort of already decentralized in a way across data centers. So I think it's like we could kind of be heading like what looks like separate directions and eventually end up kind of in one place there. And I think that would be fantastic because I think cloud gaming, I mean, I'm bullish on cloud gaming in general. So I guess I'm a little biased, but I think the merger of the two would be amazing. Because then, when Stadia shuts down or something, like you just move that stuff over to another one and all your data is persistent on the blockchain and you don't have to worry about it.
Sounds centralized to me, bro.
At the end of the day, everything's going to be centralized to some fashion, right? Like you can't truly decentralize everything. But it's, obviously we can decide how much makes sense for each thing. So
Nico just died a little bit on the inside hearing that statement.
Yeah.
I said it was composable still. You're fine.
No, honestly, like, I think I'm too optimistic here, or like I'm too much of a dreamer. Devin is more realistic. So, what you should take away from this podcast is like more likely than not, what Devin says is more likely to happen than my view of this. But yeah.
Well, your view will happen in the short term, which is great because that's what makes my view happen in the long term.
Interesting.
Enables it.
Ryan, I interrupted you earlier.
I'm just gonna say I was very proud of Devin for fully absorbing like the Web3 ethos, and then also being able to discuss like in depth like concepts like the trilemma and the like. So, and also like talking about like more like the like singular like EVM, one Ethereum rules them all versus like the app chain / step chain thesis that was also like a well covered in his.
I'm still a Solana skeptic.
His
though.
tirade, yeah. So
we all are. Everyone.
It's very nice to see, yeah, because Devin's like experienced in a whole bunch of other things, but it's like all in all, I think it's been like 2 years since you came to Web3, right? Thereabouts.
I mean, I was teaching Solidity development like back in the CryptoKitties days, like 2017 and stuff. But yeah.
Oh, okay, you're OG. Okay. So then I take it back. I'm no longer proud of you.
Yeah. Sorry, there's no refunds
right.
in Web3, man. Once you make a transaction, it's permanent.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd love the take. I'd love the take of Mr. Infrastructure Man here about this whole subject.
Is that me, Nico? Is that your
You're my
name for
infrastructure
me?
man?
I think what I've always been most excited about in this entire realm is maybe even more on the creator side and what it means for iterating game concepts and rewarding the people that contribute to that. So even if I build one single asset that then gets replicated, the fact that it's traceable and I can be automatically compensated for my work, and building up a massive library of assets that can be utilized across games or across versions of games. I think where I get concerned, Nico, is on your point about the experience may never be quite as good as if this was just a normal centralized game. And I think I have maybe some concerns based on what we have seen with cloud gaming, and things like latency do actually impact people's willingness to adopt something novel. And so the value that's created from the player perspective is going to have to be offset by these costs of the smoothness of the experience. And so to Devin's point on maybe there's a hybrid, who knows, maybe on the game engine side, the creator component is entirely decentralized and on chain, and the player experience is more traditional. But I think there's definitely something compelling about how games are built. We'll have to see how the tech evolves to see if it's a viable way to play the game. But I think that's still up in the air for me. So not entirely sure yet. Nico, what gets you particularly excited about everything being on chain from the player perspective and every action being logged? Because I know you're a big fan of that. Just curious on the value you really see.
So I can't imagine like a killer use case today. But I've been surprised many times by like someone's building something with a new technology, and I'm like, holy shit, how could I have never thought of that? And so, I'm just open-minded, and I just see a lot of potential. I think, given the composability of all of this, and Ryan mentioned this before, where everything becomes modular, right? I think will mean that we'll be able to do super fast iterations, and like, I think we'll be able to, if this thing manages to scale, to build immense virtual worlds with like insane interactivity and a scale that has never been seen before. I can also see a very easy implementation of, as I said like earlier, the more things happen on chain. So once your bank interactions are on chain, right? Once there's a safe way for you to have your own wallet and to interact with all of your finances. Like anyone could build like a physical or like a metaverse bank, right? In this on-chain world where anyone can implement this, and then anyone can experiment with the user experience around that. And maybe it makes sense to like, oh, I have this account, and that's like a physical place where you go to do that account, and then you turn around and then you have something else. I don't know. Like as I said, I'm not very creative, right?
Aurori was talking a bit about that. So I remember like back in 2021, Aurori, remember that 100 million for 7% of their token sale? Very very interesting. So Aurori, we covered that actually way back on Navic, right? But they, as part of their plans back then in 2021, they wanted to get people into DeFi, right, in their game, like in a sort of approachable kind of way. But then part of that was also like eventually like growing into having like, banks in game, right? And so like, you learn how to, use a bank in game. And, there have been other like explorations of that, like back in 2021 as well. Like Atlantis World had like a front end, like basically walk around, right, as a pixel character. It was like a knockoff punk, I think. That was like their placeholder character. But the important functionality they're demonstrating was that they could interact with like Aave, for example. So they had like a, interface where you could interact with Aave, and then you just interact Aave, you can deposit tokens there within the game itself, right? And the thing is that that's all achievable like right now. It doesn't have to be kind of like, everything fully on chain. It's just like realistically, like what you're doing is like you have the interface to Aave, and then you could try and take a spread or a cut of that, right? For referring, or like just add your own cut being the front end, and that's the whole business already, right? So it just now then it reduces to like whether you have the ability to get those users in the door in the first place to begin like trusting you. How they don't have to trust you, they just have to, they have to trust you to begin interacting with contracts in your game anyway. But yeah.
Nico really reminds me of the open source hardcore people from the 90s. Like I think if you were older, Nico, you would have been one of those guys, big old beards and stuff, just like Stallman worshiper or something back in the day. Like, but I think that there's a lesson there, right? So those people were kind of come across extreme and hardcore, like in their beliefs around open source and stuff. But like open source, it powers the entire internet now. Like so much stuff is built on open source, for good or bad. Like for cybersecurity reasons, I would say there's also a bad side to that as well. But it clearly worked, right? And I think there's a lesson there for blockchain where it's like there's skeptics and there's people like, oh, I see all these problems with it, and it goes through these kind of lumps. But at the end of the day, like it starts to embed itself into the infrastructure of things. And I think that's what open source did. And I see the same path happening for this stuff, like whether that be composability, the same way the open source libraries were a composability thing, like the way Linux was built and all these forks and all these things that people share. And I think there's a good parallel in open source in general that I think, maybe 20 years back or whatever, like kind of went through the same process. And so I think we can look to that to see like, okay, cool. Well, there's definitely a future here, but it also has to go through this period where everyone's like, why do we need this? What's the point of this? Like, why I can't trust random people doing this. Like this, you could say that about open source or blockchain, right? It's the same kind of idea. This weird kind of trust of random strangers working together, and at the end of the day, I think it worked out for open source for the most part. But the tricky part became business models and stuff around that. I think obviously blockchain has some of that a little more integrated because of the finance aspects already kind of integrated into it. It might fare a little bit better, so you don't have to have like red hat business models where you're like supporting your service. And maybe it does. Maybe if you are truly saying like, okay, once my smart contract's out there, I don't own it anymore. You have to start finding ways to financialize that, like royalty type systems, like you were saying, some value flows back to you, or other new business models around giving things out but still getting something in return. And I think open source pioneered some of that as well. So plenty of room for new ideas here in this space that I think will go through that same cycle.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that, Devin. It means a lot. I would say
I believe in you. It's fine.
I would say that also on-chain games allows us to monetize logic, which we never had. I think, Phil, you mentioned this. Now you can write code, and every time that codes get executed with any kind of value transfer, you can like take like a millionth of that, which, in itself sounds like, this is not going to make me money. But if it's used billions of times, then...
You say that, but that was the original model of computing where people were running off servers and they had to pay for like the minutes they were using the compute cycles. So like it actually is the oldest form of computing.
There you go.
Come back again. I mean, we actually started in like thin clients and stuff in like the 70s. A lot of people were using thin clients. They weren't actually using their home computer. They were remoting into a cloud server or whatever. And so like we're kind of going full circle in a way back to that, which I think has been coming for a while, because at the end of the day, we don't need like crazy ass desktop GPUs all the time. Like once we stop mining coins, you don't want to switch to proof of stake. Obviously, we have our cool things in our pockets or whatever. But like I have a high-end PC and a nice phone and all this stuff, and I still remote things, use remote stuff with my VR or my phone or whatever to more powerful computers. It's just like one of those computing paradigms that I think is worth repeating to some extent, which is that not everyone has to have the most powerful thing at home. That there is always sort of this centralized decentralization struggle that happens where people want to use more powerful or more interesting things remotely. And those are things we remote into. So like I said, we go full circle on that whole 70s style.
SSH, man. Secure shell.
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
I think it reminds me of like Black Mirror, man. Like, I think there is like a slight obsession of having your own things. Or like some people, like just like, so from a social, like I guess sociological angle, like the individual wants to kind of own their own things, right? I guess in Web3, you want to own their own stuff, right? But like having your own computer, like there's air gap, like, like there's no vector for attack. Like that's like a fascination for some people, right? Like, or interest some people, right? Like having your ledger, which is a piece of physical hardware and all that. So I think there is still some sort of like appeal or romance to having like a physical thing that's yours, right? Even if you're not using it to mine, it's still like, nice to have like a computer that's fast. I think the dystopian thing is like when you're like, I want to play Dota with my friends, and then like, oh, this is like a surge charge on like, cloud gaming because it's like 7 p.m. on a Saturday and everyone wants to play Dota and like League right now. And you're like, oh, I'm going to pay $15 just so I can play one game of Dota. And it's like, right?
Wait,
I think that's like the dystopian
internet cafes
situation.
and everything are like a huge model in other countries, right? Like,
yep.
So that's
Singapore,
already
Korea,
like a thing
Japan.
too, right? Yeah,
It is a
you're
thing.
paying for computing time essentially there too. So it's not like I said, it never really went away. It's just changed forms over time.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. Yeah. No, yeah.
One final remark on this topic, sorry, and that's just, I think, to put things into context. I think there's a real chance that the whole on-chain gaming space essentially becomes as big as what EVE Online is today, which is like this very, this one world, like for nerds essentially, and you can program a bunch of stuff in there. So the bullish person in me, dreams of something enormous, but I think there's also a real chance where it's just something that remains very niche.
It's very much the original metaverse term that was used in like Snow Crash back in the day. Like that's what it was, kind of that idea of like something similar to like MUD or those kind of things. This shared virtual world with programmability. And I mean, the MUD idea is like an old idea, multi-user dungeon, which was like an old programmable like world that people shared. And so again, with that full circle 70s kind of thing, we're still kind of going through that. And I think that's a cool thing though, because we can learn from what worked in the past. We can repeat the parts that we liked but didn't work out back then, and kind of continue that, like the old quote of like, the history doesn't repeat but it rhymes, that sort of thing. I think we go through that technology. Obviously we can have some big leaps, but we still kind of recreate a lot of stuff. And then we even have like the romanticized version of the old stuff, like steampunk kind of ideas and stuff, where we that help perpetuate those circles that we go in. And I think or more spirals rather, but I think that's a good thing. But my point is that there's like a lot of stuff valuable to look back in the past. And I guess I'm just a big fat boomer over here, but there's a lot of cool stuff to learn. And I'm glad I've like lived through a lot of this stuff and seen like a lot of this stuff kind of repeating, so I can get a better idea where it's going. Like, cause you can really see the trajectories if you're like, I remember this from 20 years ago. And what happened in like, like Second Life, for example, going into like Decentraland, like that wasn't even that long ago. And we're already kind of repeating that. So like a lot of cool, valuable stuff from the past that we can make new again, but in like a better way, right? Like try and fix the problems. Like VR's been through that cycle like a million times, for example. AI too.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned New Stephenson, and I feel like duty bound to mention this. I have no vested interest in this, but New Stephenson has launched like a new blockchain, Lamina 1.
Yeah.
Which I was pretty like, I'm like, okay, I had no idea what they're doing, but interesting. Like, it's supposed to be like game centered, virtual world centered. I'm curious to see how that goes, but I don't know if you guys have any opinions on that at all.
Yeah, I think we did an episode on that.
We already discussed it, man.
Yeah,
okay.
You're running behind.
Then I'm just clueless. Then, yeah, I'll have to go and get myself updated. Yeah.
I think we're bullish on the concept, skeptical on the execution.
You guys put out so much good content, man. Like I can't keep up,
keep up, man. Keep up.
You gotta sleep sometimes too. We get it. No worries.
Yeah, I'm saying 3 jobs, jobs.
Economist and an investor.
Yeah.
Oh,
investor.
in Web3.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
In Web3. Yeah. Imagine keeping up crypto Twitter. Yeah.
Oh shit. Yeah. It's,
no wonder.
Yeah.
That's a full-time job.
Maybe final remarks. Devin and Ryan, you guys are gonna be. You guys want to shill your own panel that you're gonna be doing soon?
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So we will be in San Francisco, right? I'm starting.
Well, Berkeley,
Saturday.
kind of just outside San Francisco. Just to be clear for those of you who are like understand the geography.
Right. Yeah, we'll be in Berkeley, right? On the 2nd of November, right? For Gamer Forum. That's Gamer with a free GAM3R.org, right? Organization. And that's in the website. And we'll be there for a panel, right? So we'll be discussing at the developing game economies. It's going to be like a relatively intimate kind of like a session with game developers. So if you're a game developer, definitely like apply to hit out, right? It's tailored for you guys who are going to go into Web3 or already are in Web3 and just like get a chance to meet other, game developers, people who are thinking about the space. And yeah, so Devin and I and another associate of ours, Kiefer Zhang, right? Or Zhang.
Yeah, he was on a previous episode here.
It was a previous episode, yes. And we'll be discussing basically developing like sustainable game economies, which is, our bread and butter. Yeah. So very fun.
Cool.
Very fun.
Cool thing is it's not like invite only, but you have to like kind of sort of apply for a ticket, I guess, as a way to make sure that like it's quality people going. And so it should be like, the idea is that like discussions and networking in person should be like really good there, and everyone's there like that's interested. It's not just like a bunch of tourists, like people that are really interested in this stuff. And so I think it'll be like really cool. Like it should be a good discussion. Who knows how much I'll troll Ryan, but we'll see. But it should be fun overall. And I think that there'll be a lot of other great talks, but it's okay if you only come there for ours. Like, we're not going to be offended.
Yeah. We won't complain. Yeah. Come say hi, take some pictures. Yeah. Post on Twitter.
There you go.
Yeah. Don't post on Twitter and don't dox.
Bring your FOGDAO shirts.
Yeah. Bring your FOGDAO shirts. When FOGDAO shirts? Nico, come on.
FOGDAO merch.
Print out your NFTs.
Dude, it's FOGDAO merch is going to be
jacket.
virtual merch. Physical. Who needs t-shirts,
Well, yeah, I'll come in my augmented reality glasses and then I'll be able to see your NFTs.
Exactly.
So don't worry, I'll see them.
Like
no one else will, but I'll see them.
That's perfect. During your little talk, you can have your script,
Right, I actually thought about that. I was like, I could have my teleprompter going. It's fine.
Perfect.
No one will know.
Good. I can think of all sorts of crazy ideas for like, AR glasses, and then like you're like showing different things to different people, and they're like, that guy like is doing this thing, and you're like, like having a little
people
like
already like that on their
shoulder.
phones during it. They're like during conferences. So,
in AR. Yeah, I can't.
No, I mean, like,
yeah.
it might as well be AR. They're already in, like, Twitterverse, like, live tweeting and all that. So
That's it. Yeah. I can't wait to read the live tweets of our chat. Be fun.
yeah. So come out
Like,
if
who
you can.
these
It'll be
quacks?
really good.
Yeah.
I believe
Yeah.
it's free to attend, though. You just have to make sure to try and apply for a ticket soon.
Is it free to own though?
No, you know what? If there's no NFT version of the ticket, I guess not. Eventbrite needs to get on that.
Yeah, precise. Okay.
Good. All right,
you.
dudes. Ryan, thank you for joining. Devin, Phil, thank you for being here as usual. Listener, thank you for listening. If you haven't already, go mint your Soulbound FOGDAO toolbox. I'm assuming most of you have already done that. And then you can link your account in the Discord and you'll have a new color. Boom. You'll belong to the OGs. What we'll probably set up is that if you're an OG, you'll be able to join these as in the audience, and you can start asking questions. And you can tell, Ryan that his shirt looks amazing today, and stuff like that. So we're gonna start opening that up. Good. All right. Thank you, everyone. If you enjoyed this, by the way, feel free to give us a like. If there's things we can do better, let us know either in the comments or in our Discord. We'd love to know. All right. Thank you, and speak to you next week. Ciao.